All right, well, I will check into it and see what we can do, all righty? You're welcome. Thank you, bye-bye. All right, well, I will check into it and see what we can do, all righty? All right, check into it and see what we can do.
Morning.
So I just put this link live, so I can edit it later. I feel like I need two other monitors to be able to do.
Hey, Beth. Hey,
Yeah.
is your mic plugged in all the way, or are you just using your computer? I'm gonna switch to my.
Good morning, Andy.
Morning.
How's the office?
Good. We're back in it, and we got some people show up on Monday. It's weird because everybody's kind of on their own time, but like we haven't really dictated to everybody like, hey, you need to be in here. It's like whatever you're comfortable with.
Right.
So we got some people that are just like, hey, I'm set up at home, and they're continuing to work from home, especially if they have kids.
Right.
But it's kind of weird, but I think we're starting to get into our mode.
Okay.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty light, Beth, but I put my headphones in, so I should be able to hear you.
I just don't. I've got my AirPods in. I was testing it with my son yesterday. He said it sounded perfectly fine.
Huh.
Morning,
I can barely hear you, Beth.
It is light. Andy, you want to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to be clear. First of all, I want to thank everybody for pitching in last few weeks on a number of items. So I appreciate everybody's expertise and willingness to take some time out of their schedule to work on a number of different issues. But I know that we've had some inquiries, although very light, but some questions have arisen about maybe how we could potentially look at revising the code. This is a long range effort. We don't have any time frame on it. So it's more of a discussion purposes to get some ideas out there. I don't suspect we'll make any decisions today, obviously, but to get the conversation started anyway. And I kind of leave that, Andy, to you and Joe and Beth to maybe get a couple ideas on paper to have much further discussions on. This is, again, no time frame whatsoever to make this happen, but we wanted to have the conversation get started.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll kick off, you know, kind of having helped out and seeing some of the permit applications that have kind of come through. You know, it's allowed me to kind of dig in more specifically into things that are happening in the township. It seems to me that a majority of the permit requests have to do with fencing, has to do with driveways, and has to do with accessory structures. Joe, I know that you've been also helping out with Beth. I mean, would you guys agree that that's sort of where a majority of our permits are?
Yes.
So with that, I think that there's just some things that I'm looking at it and saying, you know, I guess more like, why are we doing this? Why or improved methods in terms of helping people put a good application? Because what I've been telling everybody, to me, zoning code to me is a tool. It's not the hammer, but at the end of the day, we want people's projects to be successful. We want to help them get through it. That we're not the barrier, but sort of walking alongside of them. And just looking at some of the things that we have on our website, I just think there can be an improvement to it. But a majority of where I think we need to focus is section 512 under accessory uses and structures, and just you know, knowing that that's a majority of the applications. The question, and knowing that it's usually fencing, driveways, or that sort of thing, that you know, maybe we clean up how it's categorized, how it's laid out, so people can find the information, understand it, and then ultimately put a good permit application together. But it also needs to take into account that, you know, like Worthington Hills is a 50-year-old neighborhood, and what the things that we want to do have to basically have to work with the existing things that, you know, we're going to encounter, because not every house is exactly the same, you know, setbacks, backyards, all those other things. So I just think we just need to kind of look at this section and really delve in on it, and make the process of submitting an application better, and then also, you know, things that we can improve on in terms of the language.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think there's some discrepancies throughout the different sections of where they go. I think it does behoove us to take a really hard look at what's existing in the township. And, you know, a lot of the homes, et cetera, the way this has been written, you know, is they're automatically non-conforming uses. So I think that one item we may want to say is kind of, or discuss about what qualifies as non-conforming use. And if somebody, i.e. wants to replace something, I think there's two ways you can go. I mean, the burden would be to put them that they have to come for a variance, but I would say that if a non-conforming use has been in existence for, I don't know, call it 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, something like that, then it's automatically approved as a variance. That gets technical, but I think it really would be a big burden on anybody that's been living in a place and it's been there for 40 years to have to come in and ask for a variance for their house because it doesn't meet the setbacks. So
and the other thing is so in the requirements, they show, you know, we're very specific in terms of, you know, they need to provide setbacks. And I think on our website, we need to show like really good examples, but help people understand, like if I have to provide a plan and I have to put setbacks on it, it's like a lot of people are just like grabbing Google Maps and doing, but everything revolves around the property lines. You know, they've got to show the property lines. And most people don't know that when they sign a mortgage or refinance, they get a plot plan along with their thing, and it's part of their documentation. And that's as good as anything to start with. It's a, number one, it's a scale drawing. Number two, it shows the property boundaries, any kind of easements, that sort of thing. So that's where I'm getting at is they are all over the board in terms of what we're getting. But at the end of the day, you know, we've got to understand what their product, you know, what their project is, and help guide them to it. I would say that our stuff is pretty clear in terms of what's considered a patio, what's considered an accessory use, what's considered, you know, so I would say our code is pretty good at saying like, hey, if your project is this, then these are your, but you got to kind of search and find it and hunt for it. And a lot of people aren't familiar with zone and code. And I think that's something that we need to kind of look at and clean up. But what Joe and I also found, Chet, not the, what also the what we have in the code versus what we have on the, well, I'm sorry, the paper application versus the online form, those two aren't in sync. Okay. The information's there. It's just some of the things have to be kind of tied up. So our online and a paper form are the same, one and the same.
So in other words, Andy, what I hear you saying is that we're good at definition, but we're not really good as far as consistency about where to look for things,
right,
and matching up. And we need to do a better job of being consistent in what we're asking for from residents when they come in for a permit, for example, as to the documentation that they need to submit to us. And that documentation should be readily available, something they don't have to go out and get a consultant or an architect, right, someone. They should have it available to them to provide to us. So, but we need, I've always said this, and I think you've said it as well, that, you know, residents aren't general contractors. They're not architects. Generally, they're not engineers generally. They're homeowners just wanting to do a project. And the first thing they think about is, who am I going to get to do this, or am I going to do it myself? And how much is it going to cost? All that paperwork, set aside stuff they're not familiar with. And we really need to kind of guide them and give them a a foolproof plan of how we move forward, making sure the paperwork is done correctly. We need to work with them to make sure the project is successful and to be able to kind of move forward on it. So I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree with any of it. I just think that perhaps it's more of a systems improvement as well as maybe looking at the code to ensure that we're consistent in what we're saying about the same item, and that it is in a very succinct area in which people can find it and they can find all the information about their particular project.
Right. Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head, and then supply things on our website that it's like, hey, maybe more definitions, like a base plan is that, I mean, it's a lot of it's just education. You know, a base plan is this, and here are three locations that you can get a base plan. If you don't have your plot plan in your mortgage documents, then here's where you can go and get it. So we're also providing them, you know, if we want it like this and it helps the approval process, then let's help them get to where, you know, to download it and do all that other good stuff. The other thing I would say is also letting them know, like, hey, we're zoning, we're going to approve your zoning, but we're not approving, like, if you're putting an addition on or you're doing anything like that from a structural standpoint, like, hey, these are all of the things that you got to go to Franklin County for. And I don't think that that's real clear. We're zoning, we're going to approve your project, we're going to say it meets the code, but hey, you've got another step in some instances that you've got to go to Franklin County and get all your approvals. And then what I'd like to see is those two things, that either Franklin County says before they approve, that they say, hey, have you gotten your zoning from Perry Township? I just, you know, the two are kind of operating independently of one another. And there would be, I'd like to see Franklin County say, hey, you need to supply your zoning app or your zoning approval as part of your permits. And then at the same time, if they're approving permits, that, you know, we know that they're getting permits through Franklin County, which we're doing that a little bit. We get a report, but I'd like to see that happen a little bit. And then on the other part of it is making sure that if it's a driveway thing, that Ian in the road department knows, so they can make sure that the curb is done the way that we want it done.
Right.
So,
okay.
I'd add on to that, and I think this goes to in the approval letter or disapproval letter, or more obviously for the approval. There's got to be some caveats that are put in there, as Andy just said. One is that this is zoning and you're responsible for getting all other approvals as necessary, regardless of what department or where they are. The other is that we're not here to act as policemen either. So we need to put the burden on the applicant that if they say the setback is going to be 8 feet, that there's teeth in that 8 feet, and they understand the ramification if it's not 8 feet. We're not going to go out and figure out where their property line is, et cetera. We'll have a general idea, but we're certainly not going to go survey every property that's got a setback and then try to measure 8 feet from that. So the burden has to be on them to meet the requirements, and the ramifications have to be there that if they don't meet the requirements, i.e. a neighbor calls up and says, hey, you know, this is supposed to be 8 feet and I just got my yard surveyed and it's only 6.5. The burden is going to be on the applicant that put it 6.5 feet to move it as a worst case scenario, or apply for a variance that's not guaranteed to come through. So we just don't have the time or the resources to be out policing, but we have to have the teeth that, look, you were told, you were warned, it behooves you to figure out where your line is, and you do what you said you were going to do in your application, or you're in violation.
right.
Can you guys hear me now, okay?
Yes.
I can hear you. I can hear you now, Beth.
I figured it out. Okay. It took me a while. I lost your voices for a while. In any case, yeah, I think we definitely need some kind of standardization from beginning to end. I mean, right now, when I'm sending out applications, I'm putting that kind of information in there. You need to show your property lines and easements, so on and so forth. I took a survey from a mortgage document that I found. I just deleted or erased all the personal information, and I've been sending that sample out so folks know what it looks like. And then say, you know, if you can't find this, then this is what you can use, but you've got to be marking these distances, you know, just going down through the checklist sheet. And
Right.
and then as a follow-up at the end, when we're approving them, I'm going back saying, remember, you know, if your fence is in an easement, a utility company comes up, you know, you may have to move that portion of your fence. Utility company is not responsible for damage, you know, if it happens to be there. So, but I'm trying to get things more consistent. But I think if we just had some kind of a check-off type sheet at the beginning,
Yeah.
and it would make life a lot easier. And the big thing, and I know you've talked about this a lot, Andy, is to do some kind of flow charting. And I don't think it has to be anything drastic. It's just if you want to put in a fence, you know, boom, first you do this, and this is where you find your information. I think people get really lost the way it is right now. And to your point, there's inconsistencies between the online application and the hard copy. And that goes so far as approvals too. The way where I approve the hard copy, it's different on the online versions. So.
And you know, I mean, Beth brings up a good point. So for me, it would be helpful, and I think for a resident as well as whoever, you know, when you get into the processing of these requests, it would be helpful to have a flow chart. I'm not a big flow chart person, but because I don't do them, but I think it would be helpful for those, I mean, residents who don't understand all the things that they would need. If we can simplify it for them, say, you know, like Beth said, if you're putting up a fence, okay, you do this, you submit this to so-and-so, and these are the things that you have to submit with your package, blah, blah, blah. This is who looks at it, so forth and so on. I know that may take some time, and we have time. I mean, this is just, you know, we're just trying to improve things here. So I think we'd have time to maybe put some flow charts together. I agree. Fences, driveways, accessory structures, those are generally the things we run across, right, Beth? I mean, that you're saying. Okay. So, I mean, if we were to focus on maybe those three items and flow chart that out, that would help us look at possible improvements in the system and consistencies. So.
One other idea that, go ahead, Beth, sorry.
I was going to say, even if, you know, on the website, just provide a link to where to find things. I mean, just since I've kind of been acting zoning officer, I've said it before, is that within the first couple of weeks, I was highly frustrated. It's like, I can't find this, I can't find that, this doesn't make sense. So if it's not making sense to me, I mean, it would make sense to somebody who does this day to day, but for someone who doesn't, it's a very different story. So I just think there's simple, easy ways we can provide information in print or on the website where folks have a step-by-step process to follow.
One other thing that Andy and I spoke about, I think there's another tool that could be here to help protect what we want, but give a little bit of flexibility as well. You know, we have these absolutes in the code, you know, 20-foot side yard, minimum of 8 foot on one side. And oftentimes in a zoning text, some of the newer zoning text, what they'll offer is that the zoning officer or someone designated or a couple of people designated are allowed to grant what we call minor variances to the code. And sometimes they put a percentage together with that so that it doesn't automatically trigger going to BZA, the application, everything else. But if somebody is off by 2, 3, 4 inches, I can tell you that historically what they do is it's 10% of what the requirement is. If it's less than 10%, it can be a administrative variance granted. And I think it's another tool in the toolbox. There's plenty of examples out there. It's not something we need to recreate. And it's really just deciding who is responsible for that review, or several people. And if they all sign off, then that's administrative variance is granted.
I've heard that before. I mean, I like it. I mean, I like the fact that, you know, you're standardizing the process, but yet giving it flexibility. So there's a standard percentage of which you can work within on the administrative side. You have someone who is designated to take that responsibility on and make that decision without activating a more formal process with the BZA, for instance. But it gives you the flexibility with the homeowner that if they're off a certain amount, then they don't have to go through another layer of government.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is, you know, geez, I'm 2 inches from, you know, like Joe said, the absolute, and it's like, well, to the letter of the law, you know, you got to go through BZA, and it's like, okay, and then you got to set up $200 fee for them to go in and say, yeah, it's 2 inches, you know, and we get a lot of that with like playground structures and you know, basketball hoops and things like that are just like, can we just get 2 or 3 people to look at it, make a call, and then, you know, so we're not, you know, like you said, Chet, adding another layer of, you know, bureaucracy to the whole approval process.
So I was wondering, Andy, I don't know what your thoughts are, Joe's thoughts and Beth's. I'd really like to flow chart this thing first. I mean, I love that idea. One, because it gives us all, we're all on the same page, right, in regards to what has to happen. We know which are the hot spots in regards to what are the general requests that come in. And so if we could flow chart those processes, that not only helps us be clear what page we're on, but also it helps the resident as clear as to the steps that they need to take as the project manager, so to speak, of their project. And then get into making sure on down the road, making sure things are consistent in the same place of our code, and you know, information is available right there at their fingertips. But it's something that I think we could do administratively is to flow chart it, and that would help a great deal. Right. I don't know what your thoughts are, but.
No, I mean, I think it, and it helps us understand where we got gaps and holes and where we need to fill them, and, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's the thing that we had to start at the 50,000 foot level, make sure our processes, our flow is the way we want it. And then we can start, you know, adding the detail to it.
Right. What do you think, Joe?
I'm fine. I think it's got to be at 50,000 feet, or it'll just go on a shelf and nobody will look at it if it gets too detailed.
Okay. Beth, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think that's the easiest to do it. Just we start with, if I'm understanding you properly, is just start with one that I'm seeing a lot of, and just kind of flow chart that, and then. I know I on paper, I have my own little checkoff sheet. So now, when I'm going through one, I'm checking off the different things that I need to be watching for. And I think, and that's helped me. So I think it would be beneficial. I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to take me much time to do.
Yeah.
I get that initial format down, then it's just more filling in the blanks.
Right.
Okay. So it gets down to, you know, when my staff says, well, when I say what we need to do, they realize it's not really what I need to do, what somebody else needs to do. So, I mean, you know, Andy, you and Joe are the experts in this area, and obviously Beth is dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, do you want to start with one and see how it works out and use that as a template for others?
Yeah, well, I think Joe and I can kind of sit down and just do a bubble, we'll just bubble things out real quick, hand sketch, make sure that, it is, and then we can formalize that. If we got it the way we want it, then we can formalize it into a more of a clean document. And then, like I said, start filling in the gaps, the gaps from there.
Okay. That works.
So I think probably, Joe, I don't know what your schedule is, but, probably what we ought to do is have a regular to keep everybody, moving, keeping the wheels moving forward. Maybe what we ought to do is just have a, and not that we have to, maybe it's just Beth, Joe and I, so we don't have to, have a meeting and then we'll have like every 2 weeks have this type of a meeting where, we got to announce it and all that other good stuff.
Okay. Well, let's try to do that. If we get Beth, if we could schedule something 2 weeks out, let Andy and Joe work on some high level stuff. And obviously they're going to be in touch with you because, they're going to ask a couple questions, I'm sure, about what you're experiencing. So, but if we could flow chart, 1 or 2 items and just see, as Andy said, where the gaps are, that will help, I think, everybody get on the same page and figure out what really needs to be done moving forward into the future.
Right.
At the same time, I can kind of be working on the visual, what would actually go out to the residents, and again, just fill in the blanks once I get that information.
But just understanding that we're focused on section 512, like cleaning up the majority of what we're saying. This isn't addressing, if a commercial property wants to do this, it's just we're focusing on the residential part of it.
That's where almost everything's coming in from.
Right.
I think that's a great starting point.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a marathon. So it's, it's not a sprint. So
I think one of the first actions has to be that the printed document, not the online, needs to be taken out. It should not be available to anybody because it's not correct. And we're going to run into a problem when somebody says, well, I met this and this is what it says. It isn't correct. It does not go along with what the code is. So I don't know where people get that, or where it's a PDF or whatever. I think it's a PDF. It's not the online. I think it's a PDF on the township website, I'm assuming.
The zoning code itself.
No, the application.
Application.
The online application is correct. The PDF application is not correct.
That's the certificate of zoning compliance one, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's okay, well, that's fine. I can get that pulled down.
So we need to replace it with the online, get that printed up some way in a PDF and put that in its place.
okay. For consistency purposes.
Yeah. They're going to come, somebody's going to come in and say, I meet this. And well, that's not code, but why is it out there then?
Why is it out there? Why have you, it's on your site. So,
Right.
okay. Well, maybe that's more the immediate thing to do. So kind of take care of that.
Get that,
Okay.
up with Mary and get that taken care of.
And then Chet, once we get this process down, I think then we can kind of look at, the more specific things in 512 that, I just see like there's some setbacks that are just kind of squirrely, and I'm like, why would we do that? But that's a discussion. That's a discussion
On
for
down the
another
road.
time. Yeah.
Don't think it would, because I know I talked to Joe about a couple things that I just don't understand, or they don't make sense, or and one we were talking about yesterday is if someone builds an extension on their drive to park cars and they stick a basketball hoop there, the whole thing changes. I think we need to have a list going, just a perpetual list of see something, you can put it on it. So what would you guys think about me creating a separate Dropbox that we can just drop things in as
Right.
that way we can all see what other people are thinking in between our meeting times.
That would be helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think, if we see something, let's not lose it.
Yep.
I can just have a Word doc in there and you guys can just add as you go.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Ready, it just needs to be there so we don't forget.
Yep.
Okay. So,
So just as an FYI of some of the cleanup things and what I talked about was that if something's been existing, I think that's something else we have to have on our agenda pretty quickly. I.e. the code says that in R2 that a lot with, for a one family dwelling, there should be a lot with 100 feet or more at the front line of the dwelling. Well, that's really awesome, but my lot's only 85 feet wide. So, and I can assure you there's more of me out there than there are 100-footers. So because this came in after the fact is where I'm saying it would behoove us not to change this, because going forward, this is a nice standard to have for any future development that occurs. So we don't want to get rid of this. But what we want to do is come up with a grandfathering clause for, like I said, items that have been in place for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, whatever, that they're automatically granted a variance so that if somebody wants to tear down their garage and rebuild it, they're not forced to come in on the same spot. They're not forced to come in for a variance. I mean, it's been that way for 45 years. And under our code, they got to come in and get a variance.
Yeah.
Hey,
Well, you could grow your front yard, Joe, if you wanted to.
Yeah.
We got enough water, not to grow.
I'll just move the property line off from my two neighbors, then they'll be in violation.
Hey,
more problems on Blind Brook, I know.
Hey, and there's another question I had, and this relates to the EPCON thing. So they have an association, right? That they that things have got to get approved through.
Right.
How does like my parents live in an EPCON, so if they want to plant a tree, they want to put a fence, they want to do anything outside, they got to go, they got to go to the board and then the board. So, but how does that dovetail into us? Do they have to have, or is it everything go through the association?
No, that comes down to the disclaimer that we're going to say. That all we're doing is granting the township, you meet the township zoning requirements.
Right.
You're responsible for all other approvals. HOA, Franklin County, water and sewer, stormwater, whatever. It's not our issue, it's yours.
Yeah.
So they really have, Joe, they have to meet both.
Yeah, they would have to. Yeah, if they didn't meet them, then they'd be in violation of the HOA, and their defense isn't to say, well, I got a zoning certificate from the township. That has nothing to do with their HOA rules.
Yeah. So, but Andy, that brings up an excellent point. So that particular development project, as we're looking at things moving forward on this particular topic, I think we need to keep in context what that development looks like. Because I don't think that we have that kind of development anywhere else in the township.
Right.
So just to kind of keep that in the back of our mind as we go down the road and say, hey, for instance, Joe's 85 feet, is that something that, what is the front yard of those condos? I mean, what do they look like? I mean,
right. I mean, I know Epcon has a very specific, like their HOA has a very specific, you can do this, you can't do that, and it's policed by them. I mean, it's pretty locked down. But, the question is, if there are other developments within the township, do we require them to have an HOA, or is that kind of standard practice? I mean, like Worthington Hills, our civic association or our HOA is volunteer. Is that sort of standard practice, Joe, now that any new development, residential development has an HOA or some kind of a governing body for?
I would tell you that it really, I think it's something that we as a township want to stay out of. It's elective to them. A lot of people like Epcon people like the HOA because they have their own rules. They keep everybody in uniformity, et cetera. On a residential, single family, et cetera, trying to get the teeth in them. And once we require them, then the question is, well, what's required in them?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just, I don't think it's a path we want to go down. The unique piece of this is that the standards that are in, say, the Epcon or the Romanelli project are that they're going to come in under a PD. And a PD is put together for the specific purpose as ours is written, so that it's a collective view of the project. And collectively, do you like the project or don't you like the project? And if you like the project, then it gives you all the capacity to, we can waive this, we allow you to do this, we can do this. It's not uniform where your setback is this, it's this. The flexibility is there for them to come in and say, we think overall with what we've got, it's a really nice project. And then the approval goes on through planning, zoning, BZA, and the trustees, and they go, yeah, we agree that this is good. That's the purpose of the PD. And that gets to your point, Chet, of look, what's this look like elsewhere? Well, elsewhere, they're going to have to come in with a PD and explain this is why we did it. Do all the variances that we're really looking at equate, well, they're not variances, but if they were under the standard code, but what are we doing on a collective basis? Does it look like a nice project? And is it something the township wants?
That's a good point.
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of addresses, but that like when somebody builds a house, they may not put in a patio right away. They may build the house and then it's like, of course the homeowner or the builder is like saying, hey, do you want to upgrade to this? You want to upgrade to that? So like if I'm as a homeowner building a new house and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, hey, you know what? We really wanted to do that screened in porch that we didn't build. So then that would go to the township, those types of projects, patio, accessory use. I want to put all of that comes under our code, even though it's a brand new development,
Well, would not a new development still site plan and everything else would still have to get zoning clearance?
Right.
So when it comes in, if they've got if they come through zoning clearance and they got a house and they don't put the screen porch on, and halfway through they decide they want the screen porch, then they would have to file an application.
Okay.
Clearance again for that screen porch.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, that's end this discussion for another day. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So, do you all want to schedule the same time 2 weeks out? Will that work for everybody?
Yep.
It doesn't work for me.
Jeez, Pete.
Come on, Joe.
I know.
Andy, I got to tell you, we have moved mountains for his schedule.
It's amazing.
Amazing. I'll tell you what would work. I can do 8:30. I can do 9.
We're talking. This is the 5th.
Yeah. It's 9 work.
Yeah, 9 o'clock works.
Okay.
That's a problem. How long is the discussion? I got a half hour. between 9 and.
Yeah, I don't
9:30.
think it needs to be. I mean, I think we keep it to a half hour. It doesn't have to be an hour-long conversation because it's more going to be more of an update, ask questions, and then decide what the
Okay.
to-do list is for the next 2 weeks.
Okay. I'll
Good deal.
skip.
Make it 9.
All righty.
Okay.
Cool.
Hey, Beth, I got one question. Does Rumpke take pallets? This is off the topic. Do they take pallets?
I believe so, but I can double check for you.
Can you? Okay, I'll just tell him that you're checking, so. I got a resident asking.
If they take what, Chet?
Pallets, wooden pallets.
They do. Hey, Chet, they do because I had a during the lockdown, I had a work thing and it came in a giant crate with a pallet and I put it out. I mean, this thing was massive and I put it out and they picked it up. So.
I'd
You
recommend.
didn't do it bulk.
No, I didn't do a bulk call in. I just set it out and they picked it up and took
Okay.
it. So.
Okay, I'm going with that. Okay. Good enough. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Have a great weekend.
You
All
too.
right. We'll see you.
Bye.